One quiet visit to her own bank was supposed to be routine. Instead, it exposed a hidden truth she could no longer ignore. This is the story of Amelia Warren, the CEO who refused to stay silent, and the moment that changed her company forever. The summer sun bore down on downtown Atlanta as Amelia Warren pulled into the Everbright Bank's flagship branch. The building gleamed with polished glass and marble, a symbol of the empire she had built from scratch over the last decade. Today, Amelia wore no tailored suit, no designer pumps, just faded jeans, a simple blouse, sneakers, and a crossbody bag. To anyone watching, she looked like just another middle-aged woman running errands, and that was exactly what she wanted. Whispers had reached her ears. Stories of clients being treated differently depending on how they dressed, how they looked. Policies were printed, speeches were made, but where they lived, today, Amelia was here to find out. The bank's heavy glass doors whooshed open and the familiar scent of ink and polished wood filled her senses. A handful of customers dotted the spacious lobby. No one recognized her. Perfect Amelia adjusted her bag, kept her chin high, and approached the teller window. She wasn't here as the CEO today. She was here as a test, and this branch was about to fail. Spectacularly, behind the counter sat a young teller, mid-20s sharp jawline, a badge that read E. Simmons. He didn't smile, didn't even look up properly when Amelia said, "Good afternoon, I'd like to make a withdrawal." Please, wordlessly, he slid a form across the counter. The energy was cool and different. Amelia filled it out carefully. $7,500, a standard amount, but just enough to trigger ID verification. She handed over her driver's license, her account number, neatly printed. The teller finally looked up, really looked, and something shifted. His brows knit together, his lips pressed into a tight line. His fingers hovered above the keyboard, then stopped. "Just a moment," he muttered, picking up her ID. Instead of proceeding with the transaction, Simmons disappeared through a side door, her ID in hand. Amelia leaned lightly against the counter. 5 minutes passed, 10. Other customers came and went, served with smiles and nods. Amelia's corner of the lobby stayed still. Heavy, the message was loud even without a word spoken. "You don't look like you belong here." The frosted door swung open. Out walked Simmons with someone behind him, a man in his late 40s, stocky gold cufflinks glinting against his pressed shirt sleeves. His name tag read David Benton, branch manager. He offered Amelia a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I understand you're trying to make a rather large withdrawal today." Amelia nodded once. "Yes, it's my account, my ID." David picked up the ID from Simmons and studied it a little too long, as if willing it to reveal something suspicious. "Is this your first time banking with us?" he asked casually. But Amelia heard the undertone. "Are you really supposed to be here?" "No," she said sharply. "I've been banking here since this branch opened." David hummed thoughtfully, flipping the ID over. "And what is it you do for a living, Miss Warren?" The air around Amelia seemed to sharpen. "I'm in finance," she replied, voice even. David gave a slow nod, then straightened. "Well, unfortunately, without additional verification, we cannot process this withdrawal at this time. It's policy," but Amelia knew better. This wasn't about policy. This was about appearance. Amelia felt the heat rise behind her eyes but kept her voice steady. "What more do you need?" David shrugged lightly. "Perhaps a utility bill. A second form of ID." Customers nearby shifted, sensing the tension. "I have a government-issued ID and my account number," Amelia said, clear enough for others to hear. "Your teller didn't ask the gentleman before me for anything extra." David's expression tightened. "It's a matter of security," he said smoothly. "Fraud is common these days." Amelia's smile was thin as wire. "And tell me, is fraud common only when a customer wears sneakers instead of a suit?" David's jaw clenched, but he held the line. Then he did something Amelia had hoped he wouldn't. His hand slipped under the counter. A silent alarm tripped. From a side door, a uniformed security guard emerged, broad-shouldered. Hand resting near his belt, the guard stepped closer, stance wary. "Is there a problem here, ma'am?" he asked, his tone more warning than question. Amelia straightened her spine. "Oh, there's about to be," she said, cool and sharp. The security guard glanced at David, waiting for instruction. David gave a tiny nod. "Miss, if you'd kindly step aside until we can verify your credentials," the guard said, moving closer. Amelia didn't flinch. Instead, she reached into her bag slowly so no one could claim she was a threat and pulled out her phone. With a single tap, she began recording. David's face paled slightly. "Let's make this clear," Amelia said, voice loud enough for every curious customer to hear. "I presented legal identification. I provided my account number. I met every security requirement. She angled the phone toward David, toward the teller, toward the security guard. And despite that I'm being denied service, treated like a criminal, and now faced with security intervention. Why David opened his mouth but no words came out. Amelia pressed on, voice cutting through the frozen air. You say it's about security. I say it's about something else entirely. Then as David reached out to grab her ID again, his desperate final move, Amelia calmly snatched it back. She flipped it over and tapped her finger against the embossed name. My name, she said, clear and steady, is Amelia Warren. I am the founder and CEO of Everbright Bank. Silence crashed through the lobby like a wave. The shift in the room was instant. The security guard, who had been looming only moments before, straightened awkwardly and took a small step back. The teller Simmons turned ashen, his mouth opening and closing like a beached fish, and David Benton, the branch manager who had exuded polished superiority just seconds earlier, he looked like he might collapse behind the counter. Amelia kept her phone steady, capturing every second. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't causing a scene. She was simply irrevocably telling the truth. I built this bank, she said, her voice slicing the silence. I authorized the funding for this branch. I signed your payroll checks. And today, she paused, letting her gaze travel over every employee frozen in place. You treated your CEO like a criminal. David's lips quivered. Miss Warren, I had no idea. No, Amelia interrupted, calm but lethal. You had every idea. You just thought someone who looked like me didn't belong here. The customers in the lobby who had tried to pretend nothing was happening now stared openly. There would be no erasing this moment. David stammered, trying to salvage his authority. If you'll allow me to explain. Miss Warren, we have strict procedures. Procedures that somehow apply only to certain people, Amelia snapped, lifting her phone slightly higher to ensure the camera caught his face. No extra forms were requested from the man in the navy suit. No security was summoned for the woman who just deposited a check. But for me, Amelia smiled coldly. For me, you called backup. David flushed deep red. The security guard shifted uncomfortably, hands twitching near his belt, but not moving. Amelia's voice stayed calm, even friendly, like a scalpel slicing open a rot. I think it's time you called corporate, she said, right now. David hesitated, but the cold certainty in her gaze broke him. He turned shakily toward a side office, fumbling with his phone. Across the lobby, a teenager pulled out his own phone and began recording too. Good, Amelia thought grimly. Let the world see what bias looked like in broad daylight. David disappeared into the manager's office, leaving Amelia standing calmly at the counter. She lowered her phone for a moment, pocketing it. The tension remained thick, but she refused to leave. Two more tellers peeked nervously from behind their stations. A woman in line, a nurse in scrubs, caught Amelia's eye and gave her a small, respectful nod. Amelia smiled briefly back. Real change, never came from comfort. Moments later, David returned his phone, still pressed to his ear. His face was the color of curdled milk. Yes, sir. She's right here. No, sir. We didn't realize. Yes, immediately he hung up, clearing his throat. Miss Warren, he said, stiffly, on behalf of Everbright Bank, I deeply apologize for this. Misunderstanding? Amelia tilted her head. A misunderstanding? David swallowed. We're prepared to process your transaction right away and waive all withdrawal restrictions. The room felt electric, every eye on them. Amelia considered him for a long moment, letting him stew in the weight of his failure. Then she smiled, slow and razor sharp. Oh, we're far beyond fixing this with a withdrawal. Benton, I'm not here for your transaction anymore, Amelia said, stepping back just enough to command the entire lobby. I'm here for accountability. She turned to the customers, raising her voice just enough to carry. This is a bank founded on the promise of fairness, she said. A promise I made. Today, that promise was broken. David's face drained of all color. Simmons, the teller, looked like he wanted to crawl under the counter and disappear. Amelia pulled a slim card holder from her bag and laid two cards flat on the marble counter. One business card for Everbright's corporate oversight officer and one for her personal office. To any customer here who's ever felt overlooked, doubted or mistreated, you now have a direct line to me, she said. Murmurs rippled across the lobby. The woman in scrubs clutched the card like a lifeline. And David just stood there, utterly powerless. Amelia leaned forward slightly, voice dropping to a blade. As for you, Mr. Benton, he flinched. Expect a call from HR by the end of the day, and bring a box. Amelia's work wasn't done yet. She straightened, commanding the room with a quiet dignity no title could confer. Everbright Bank will be undergoing a full internal review, she announced. All branch managers and frontline staff will be retrained starting next week. She smiled, cool, professional. Undeniable, those unwilling to meet our standards will be replaced. David's hands twitched at his sides, the security guard looking like he desperately wished he'd called in sick. Stepped back into the shadows. Amelia turned to Simmons, the young teller. "You're young," she said, voice less harsh but no less firm. "You can either learn from this or find somewhere else to work." Simmons nodded frantically, cheeks flaming. Amelia gave the lobby one last sweeping look, ensuring every customer, every witness felt seen. "This is my bank," she said softly, "and everyone who walks through these doors deserves the same respect." She tucked her phone away, calm and victorious, and walked out the front doors into the blinding afternoon sun. Behind her, Everbright Bank stood silent. Change wasn't coming. It had already arrived. By the time Amelia returned to her penthouse office, the damage, or depending on how you looked at it, the justice was already underway. The teenager's video had hit social media like a lightning strike. In just 2 hours, it had been shared over 300,000 times. The clip showed everything: the cold dismissal, the security intimidation, the icy reveal of who Amelia truly was. Everbright, bias trended by Sunset financial news outlets, picked it up. Local TV stations ran the footage on evening broadcasts, narrating how a bank CEO exposed discrimination within her own company. Amelia sat back in her leather chair, watching the news roll on her flat screen. She wasn't smiling. This wasn't about revenge. It was about confirmation proof that the whispers she had heard were real, that the infection ran deeper than policy. She clicked her pen once sharply. Then she dialed her chief operations officer. "Get every regional manager on a plane," she said, "Atlanta tomorrow." Mandatory. Change wasn't going to be suggested. It was going to be forced. The next morning, the Everbright Tower's 40th floor conference room was packed. 30 regional managers, dozens of branch leaders, the heads of HR compliance and customer relations. None dared skip the summons. At the head of the long glass table stood Amelia. No introductions, no preamble. She hit play on the viral video. The room watched in excruciating silence as their CEO was humiliated in one of their own branches. When it ended, Amelia leaned forward, resting her hands on the polished table. "This is what happens," she said coldly, "when respect becomes selective." No one dared meet her eyes. "We don't need new slogans," she continued. "We need new people, or the old ones, rebuilt from the ground up." She tossed a thick folder onto the table. "Effective immediately, mandatory bias training. Anonymous customer audits. Mystery shoppers from civil rights groups. Executive bonuses tied to customer equity scores. One failure, one bias complaint, no bonuses. Period." The COO swallowed audibly. "And David Benton," someone whispered. Amelia smiled thinly. "Already terminated." Publicly. Later that afternoon, Amelia walked branch to branch unannounced. No suits, no camera crews, no press releases. Just her. A notebook and a sharp pair of eyes. At a midtown branch, she watched an elderly Latina woman struggle to open a new account, ignored for 20 minutes by staff. At a suburban location, she saw a young black couple offered only the most basic financial products, while the white couple ahead of them received loan options and business card referrals. The patterns weren't always loud. They were silent, the insidious hum of assumption, humming underneath every interaction. It sickened her. At each stop, she took notes. Names, dates, behaviors. She didn't storm or yell. She simply observed and built her next move. Because Amelia Warren wasn't just going to patch the leaks. She was going to rebuild Everbright Bank from the studs. Within 2 weeks, Everbright Bank underwent the largest internal shakeup in its history. Outdated managers were removed, new leadership, diverse, empathetic, sharp, was promoted. Amelia launched a customer advocacy division, reporting directly to her, bypassing all middle management. Complaints didn't get filed away anymore. They landed on her desk. She funded a second look program. Customers denied loans credit or service for questionable reasons had their cases reviewed by independent panels. She paid out of pocket for national workshops on financial fairness, open to the public. And for her employees, mandatory empathy immersion programs partnering with community organizations to experience firsthand what inequality felt like on the other side of the counter. This wasn't PR, it was repair. It wasn't enough to say Everbright cared. It had to prove it every day, with every customer in every branch. One chilly Friday afternoon, Amelia stood near the front entrance of Everbright's downtown branch. This time, no jeans. She wore a tailored black suit, not to flaunt power, but to honor the seriousness of what had been rebuilt. She watched from a distance as an immigrant father nervously opened a savings account for the first time and was treated with patience and genuine kindness. She smiled as an elderly woman was personally walked through her deposit process. No rush, no dismissal. A little girl clutched her mother's hand, marveling at the colorful new mural across the wall that read, "Every face, every story, every dream matters." Amelia exhaled slowly. It wasn't perfect yet. Change never was. But Everbright Bank was no longer blind to its own reflection, and neither was she. This wasn't the victory she had dreamed of when she built her company. It was better. It was real. Amelia turned and walked out into the late afternoon light, a small, hard-won smile on her face. The fight wasn't over. But now she knew it was finally truly hers to win. The story of Amelia Warren's undercover stand didn't stay confined to Atlanta. It rippled outward, reaching Wall Street, Washington, D.C., and main streets across the country. Business magazines called it the most necessary leadership moment of the decade. Talk shows dissected the footage frame by frame. University professors assigned essays about systemic bias, using Everbright as a case study. Other CEOs were asked bluntly on air, "Would you pass the Amelia Warren test?" Some stumbled, some dodged, but none could ignore it. Inside Everbright, the culture shifted day by day. Staff were cautious at first, uncertain if the change was real. But when they saw promotions given to frontline workers who displayed empathy, not just numbers, trust began to grow. Customers noticed too. Survey scores climbed. Loyalty rates spiked. Everbright wasn't just repairing its reputation. It was setting a new national standard. And Amelia, she didn't crave applause. She cared about the little things: the grateful handshake from a refugee opening his first checking account, the smiling grandmother whose loan was finally approved fairly. Those were the victories that mattered. One afternoon, Amelia received a package, and inside were hundreds of handwritten letters, stacks from customers she had never met. Some shared stories of humiliation they had endured at other banks. Others simply thanked her for giving them hope that dignity still mattered. One note from a single mother stood out. "Thank you for making a place where people like me feel seen. For the first time, I don't feel small when I walk in." Amelia ran her fingers over the words, feeling a lump rise in her throat. This wasn't just corporate reform. It was personal redemption for every customer who had been quietly judged, dismissed, or pushed aside. It fueled her resolve. Everbright wouldn't just be better on paper. It would be a force for equity, respect, and second chances. And as long as she sat in the CEO's chair, she would never allow the old ways to creep back in. Not everyone applauded Amelia's changes. Some critics sneered that she was overreacting, turning minor mistakes into a national spectacle. Some rival banks quietly celebrated her difficulties, hoping the scandal would weaken Everbright's grip on the market. And inside her own executive team, a few old guard leaders grumbled about optics over profits. Amelia heard every whisper. She read every headline and she ignored them. In the next board meeting, she stood before the directors, hands steady, voice clear. "Yes, we are spending more upfront to fix our culture," she said. "Yes, it's uncomfortable." She smiled thinly. "But fairness isn't a cost, it's an investment." A few older directors shifted in their seats. Amelia leaned in. "Banks don't just hold money. They hold trust, and if we break that, no interest rate, no dividend, no merger will ever fix it." She left the meeting without waiting for a standing ovation. She didn't need one. The ones who understood stayed. The ones who didn't, they wouldn't last long under her leadership. 6 months later, Amelia decided to test Everbright again. No announcement, no secret cameras. Just her wearing simple jeans and a cotton jacket walking into a small branch on the edge of town. This time the story was different. The teller, a young man in glasses, greeted her with a genuine smile. "Good afternoon, how can we help you today?" No judgment, no extra verification. Games, just service. She filled out a withdrawal slip for $7,500, the same test as before. The teller took her ID respectfully, verified it quickly, and processed the transaction without a single unnecessary question. In 5 minutes, Amelia had the money in her hand and a polite farewell, walking out into the crisp winter air. She smiled, not the hard, bitter smile she had worn 6 months ago, but a real one. Progress. Not perfection, but real. And for Amelia Warren, that was a beginning worth everything. Standing on the sidewalk outside that modest branch, Amelia tucked the cash envelope into her bag and gazed up at the Everbright sign. It shone under the clear sky, not because of the marble or glass, but because of what it now represented. Respect, equity, accountability. Her heart was full, not with pride, but with resolve. This was never about one branch. It wasn't even about one bad manager. It was about building something better and refusing to look away when the cracks showed. She thought of the future leaders who would walk through Everbright's doors, the single mother, the young entrepreneur, the retired veteran. They would walk into branches where dignity wasn't a luxury. It was a guarantee, and they would never know. Perhaps that one quiet woman in sneakers had fought for them on a hot Atlanta afternoon. But Amelia would know, and that was enough. She turned shoulders straight and disappeared into the bustling city, leaving behind not just a bank, but a blueprint for change. It didn't take long for other banks to notice what Everbright had done. Public trust polls shot Everbright to the top of the industry. Customers who had long felt invisible at other institutions moved their accounts by the thousands. Everbright wasn't just a bank anymore. It was a statement. Soon banking conferences invited Amelia to speak. Magazines put her face on their covers under headlines like, "The Woman Who Refused to Look Away." Awards flooded in, Leadership and Ethics, Pioneer of Financial Equality, CEO of the Year. But Amelia accepted them with a cool, quiet grace. Every time she stepped onto a stage, she remembered that lobby, the stairs, the dismissal, the coldness, and she knew. This wasn't about the trophies. It was about the single mother walking into a branch without fear, the young man starting a business without being second-guessed. It was about the dignity people deserved but had been forced for too long to demand, and finally they didn't have to. One rainy afternoon, months after the incident, Amelia visited the original branch again. The lobby was different now. New staff, new murals. A giant plaque near the entrance read, "Everbright Bank, founded on trust, rebuilt on action." Customers moved easily, greeted warmly, no matter how they dressed, what they looked like, or how much they carried in their accounts. As Amelia stood in line, just observing a teller, caught her eye and smiled. "Good afternoon, ma'am," she said brightly. "Welcome to Everbright. How can I help you today?" Amelia smiled back. "No, withdrawal today," she said. "Just checking in." The teller laughed gently. "Well, we're glad you're here." For the first time in a long time, Amelia felt no need to defend, explain, or expose. Change wasn't a hope anymore. It was reality. Weeks later, an envelope arrived at Amelia's office. Inside was a photo, one she hadn't known existed. Someone had captured the exact moment she revealed her identity. That fateful afternoon. The stunned faces, the frozen bank lobby, the young woman in sneakers standing calm and unshaken. On the back, a handwritten note read, "Thank you for standing up for all of us. No signature, no return address." Amelia framed the photo and placed it not behind her desk, but near the visitors' lounge at Everbright headquarters. A reminder to every employee, every customer, and herself. One quiet act of courage could change everything. You didn't need a title to demand fairness. You only needed the will to speak and to never back down. Looking out over the Atlanta skyline one evening, Amelia reflected on the journey. She thought about the long nights she had spent building Everbright, from an idea to a powerhouse. She remembered the betrayal she felt that day inside her own walls, and she remembered the fire. It lit inside her, the refusal to let that betrayal define the company she had bled for. Leadership wasn't about perfection, it was about responsibility. She hadn't just saved Everbright's reputation, she had saved its soul, and that mattered far more than any quarterly earnings report or stock ticker. Amelia promised herself that night. So long as she led Everbright, no one would ever walk through their doors feeling small again. Years later, Amelia would finally retire. But long before that day came, Everbright would become the national gold standard for fairness and customer dignity. Her story would be taught in business schools, her leadership cited in civil rights discussions, her commitment etched into the culture of Everbright so deeply that even after she stepped away, it would endure. But Amelia didn't care about monuments or ceremonies. Her greatest satisfaction came from smaller, quieter moments. A little boy opening his first savings account with pride, an immigrant family receiving a loan they deserved, an elderly widow greeted by name, not by suspicion. That was her true legacy, and she wouldn't trade it for anything. Not money, not fame, not comfort. Just a world a little fairer than the one she had walked into. And to her, that was worth everything. Real leadership isn't about titles or power. It's about the courage to confront injustice, even when it hides inside the walls you built yourself. True change begins the moment you refuse to accept anything less than dignity for all.